Rachel Harper stood at the edge of the parade ground, her heels barely grazing the concrete as she adjusted the strap of her simple navy dress. The late afternoon sun struck the brass of the formation, glinting off polished buttons and badges, each reflection a silent testament to countless hours of discipline and sacrifice. 100 recruits snapped to attention, the synchronized rhythm of boots and breaths filling the air like a living metronome, and Rachel's gaze traced the line until it landed on her son, Philip. His jaw was tight, shoulders squared, but there was a subtle quiver in his right hand, a microtic he had fought to suppress ever since basic had begun. Captain Daniel Rourke's voice cut through the hum of the parade, sharp as a scalpel, dissecting every hesitation, every faltering posture. Lack of discipline, weak leadership material. The words, calculated and surgical, hung heavy in the air as Philip's shoulders jerked under the invisible weight of authority. Families flanked the perimeter, eyes darting between son and mother, pity disguised in polite smiles. Rachel's hand brushed against her dress as she stepped forward, measured, precise, her voice low but steady. "Captain Rourke," she began, careful to keep her posture neutral, "perhaps you might reconsider the tone for." Rourke's gaze slid over her, dismissive, lingering just long enough to trace the lines of her face before returning to Philip. His lip curled, nostrils flaring minutely, a subtle flex of ego and irritation barely perceptible unless one knew to watch. "Single mothers raising soft sailors," he muttered under his breath, dismissing her entirely, turning as if she were a shadow. A sudden gust tugged at her sleeve, the kind that lifts without warning, and in that instant, the geometric lotus tattoo on the back of her right arm emerged from beneath the fabric. The motion was subtle, yet enough to catch his attention. Rourke's jaw clenched, pupils constricting to pinpoints as if the air itself had thickened. A flicker of recognition passed over his features, fast and electric, followed by the instinctive step backward, a fraction of a second that carried the weight of a decade of secrets. His fingers twitched, a barely perceptible tightening around the ceremonial baton at his side. The formation held its collective breath, the sound of brass and boots seemed to vanish under the hum of suspended disbelief. For the briefest moment, the arrogant SEAL captain confronted the impossible, the presence of a woman who belonged, at least in history, to a realm he could not dismiss. Rachel's expression remained unreadable, lips pressed lightly, shoulders squared. The crowd, oblivious to the undercurrent of recognition, continued to watch, eyes flicking between mother and son, unaware that a storm of history and expertise had just arrived at the parade ground, silent yet undeniable. But to understand why a decorated SEAL captain froze at the sight of a middle-aged woman's tattoo, we need to go back some days. Rachel Harper's boots clicked against the asphalt of the Bay Century, each strike deliberate, measured, calibrated to avoid drawing attention yet precise enough to betray someone trained in discipline far beyond the civilian sphere. Families clustered near the perimeter, folding chairs and strollers forming casual barricades, laughter and murmurs blending into the low hum of engines and distant drills. Rachel's posture remained rigidly neutral, shoulders square, spine aligned, hands resting lightly at her sides. Her gaze swept past the provisional crowd, noting exits, security cameras, and any obstruction that could compromise situational awareness. Philip marched alongside her, olive green uniform freshly pressed, brass buttons catching streaks of the early sun. His stride was correct, textbook, yet subtle microtics betrayed nerves, a rapid blink under the left eyelid, a thumb brushing the seam of his sleeve, a shallow inhalation followed by a suppressed exhale. Rachel's eyes flicked to him once, scanning the small cues, and she adjusted her own pace to match his, a silent rhythm of reassurance and alignment. The checkpoint guard lifted a hand, gesturing them forward. Rachel's ID and Philip's pass were presented with practiced precision, and she noted the guard's subtle hesitation, the micro-adjustment of his hat, the tightening of his jaw, a sign of standard protocol mixed with curiosity at the efficient demeanor of this mother who moved like an operative. Once cleared, she allowed herself a micro-relaxation, a subtle lowering of the shoulders, though the precision in her gait remained intact. Across the parade ground, Captain Daniel Rourke's eyes scanned the arriving families and recruits. His brow furrowed just enough to crease the outer edges, nostrils flaring imperceptibly, lips pressed in a thin line. He caught sight of Philip's hesitant beam, the careful posture, the slight tremor in his fingers. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. He catalogued the beau, single mother, modest background, the kind of history he had been trained to disdain. His gaze lingered, measuring, prejudging, preparing the mental scripts he would later deliver with clinical derision during briefings. Meanwhile, Chief Petty Officer Miguel Alvarez moved along the sidelines, veteran eyes sweeping over the incoming personnel and spectators alike, his gaze locked briefly on Rachel Harper. He noted the way she navigated the crowd. Zero-wasted movement, eyes constantly scanning, yet her expressions carefully curated to appear neutral. The slight flare of her nostrils as she exhaled through a micro-sigh, the tightening at her jawline when a stroller shifted, in her peripheral vision. The calibrated softness of her gestures, everything spoke to someone who had been trained in high-stakes environments where a single misstep could be fatal. Miguel's fingers flexed around the clipboard he carried, a subtle acknowledgement of recognition. This was someone with a background the brass would not suspect, a shadow of capability hidden beneath civilian appearances. Rachel guided Philip to a central spot near the assembly point, her hand brushing his elbow briefly, not a mother's pat, but a silent signal, a tactical nudge. He adjusted his stance, shoulders squaring further, chin lifting imperceptibly. She allowed herself a small internal nod, satisfied with his posture and the controlled micro-respiration indicating readiness. From his vantage, Rourke's gaze lingered on the pair for a fraction too long. There was a twitch in his left eye, almost subliminal, as if some buried instinct or perhaps subconscious recognition had flickered across his awareness. Rachel did not meet his eyes, she did not need to. Her movements were deliberate, self-contained, projecting competence without confrontation. The recruits filed past, families chattered softly, and the bass continued its rhythm of controlled activity, oblivious to the small, silent war of observation unfolding between the seasoned veteran, the arrogant captain, and the quietly commanding mother. Miguel's eyes followed Rachel until she paused, allowing Philip to step forward. Her back straight, hands lightly folded, chin slightly raised, an unspoken lesson in composure and presence. He made a mental note. Keep tabs on her. The kind of confidence she displayed could tip the scales in situations most thought mundane. And Rachel, in turn, noted every angle, every sightline, every micro-expression in the personnel nearby, nothing out of place. Yet the subtle, electric awareness in Rourke's posture, shoulders stiffened, jaw tightened. Fingers brushing his ceremonial belt did not escape her notice. Small cracks forming in arrogance, though she did not acknowledge them, not yet. Rachel Harper sat toward the back of the family briefing room, a sterile space of harsh fluorescent lights and polished linoleum that reflected the stiffness of military precision. Rows of folding chairs lined the floor, families seated with varying degrees of curiosity and apprehension, their murmurs barely masking the anxious energy of parents measuring their children against an invisible standard. Rachel's hands rested lightly in her lap, fingers interlaced but relaxed, and her eyes swept the room in quiet calibration, tracking exits, projection angles, and security cameras. The subtle flex of her jaw, a micro-tick hidden beneath the neutral expression, betrayed nothing yet hinted at the years of discipline encoded into every fiber of her being. Philip sat beside her, shoulders square, knees pressed together, olive green uniform immaculate. His thumbs brushed repeatedly along the seams of his trousers, a barely perceptible repetition, and his lips pressed thin as he followed the presentation. Rachel allowed herself a slight exhalation through her nose, noting the subtle shifts in his posture, the cadence of his breathing, the micro-gestures that would reveal anxiety to someone attuned to it. She made a silent adjustment of her own posture, shoulder blades pulled slightly back, head aligned, projecting calm authority without words. At the front of the room, Captain Daniel Rourke's voice cut sharply through the low hum of the audio-visual system. He gestured with precise, angular motions, fingers tapping lightly against the podium as if each syllable were measured and calculated to leave a mark. "Kids from broken homes," he said, voice modulated to echo just enough to impress the room, often lacked the backbone required to lead in high-stakes environments. Soft upbringing breeds hesitation, hesitation costs lives. His lips twitched in a faint curl of satisfaction as I shifted toward Philip, scanning for the subtle indications of self-doubt. Rachel's fingers pressed lightly together, thumb brushing her knuckles, a hidden signal of acknowledgement and caution. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly at Rourke's rhetoric, micro-expressions flickering over her face. A twitch of the left brow, a tightening of the corner of the mouth, the brief compression of her jaw. These were the signals of years spent in environments where injustice was a constant variable and survival required both observation and restraint. She did not flinch, she did not move. Her presence alone communicated an authority that was unspoken but understood by those trained to notice such subtleties. The multimedia presentation continued, images of decorated seals flashing across the screen, metals gleaming under artificial light. Videos played sequences of tactical insertions, precision marksmanship, and coordinated team maneuvers, each framed in a heroic, almost mythic lens. Rachel's eyes tracked the footage, absorbing the sequences of movement, the tactical decision-making, the operational awareness that underlay every shot. She noted the glaring omission, the underground units, the Black Ops teams she had served with, the covert missions that never made it into sanitized briefings for family viewing. Her lips pressed together, forming a tight line, and she let her gaze drift momentarily to Miguel Alvarez. Miguel, seated a few rows forward, recognized the flicker in her expression, the subtle, almost imperceptible tightening of her nostrils, the half-second flash of distant memory in her eyes. He leaned slightly forward, resting his forearms on his knees, fingers curling lightly around the edges of his clipboard. His lips pressed together as he made a mental note. Daniel Rourke derived satisfaction from pushing recruits from non-standard backgrounds, testing their limits for reasons beyond the official curriculum. He had done this for years, breaking confidence in those least able to defend against psychological pressure, exploiting perceived weakness as a method of control. Rachel's gaze returned to the front, her posture unchanged, though her eyes were sharper now, scanning every gesture, every inflection, every micro-movement of Rourke's hands and shoulders. She observed the subtle rhythm of his breaths, the slight flare of his nostrils when he glanced at Philip, the twitch in his left hand as he adjusted the podium. Every detail was data, every expression a code waiting to be decoded. She did not react outwardly. She allowed the room to witness only the calm, composed mother of a recruit, while beneath the surface, decades of tactical awareness and operational expertise moved in perfect synchrony, ready to respond when the situation demanded. Philip shifted slightly, brushing his fingers along the edge of his uniform, and Rachel's hand moved an inch toward his back, a non-intrusive, silent signal to steady, to align, to focus. Miguel caught it, the subtle interaction confirming what he had suspected. Rachel Harper was not merely a supportive parent. She was a professional, calibrated, trained in operations that existed outside of public knowledge, capable of reading both the battlefield and the human operator with equal precision. Daniel Rourke continued, oblivious to the undercurrent of observation and expertise directed at him. Rachel's lips pressed together just long enough to suppress the instinctive response to his microaggressions, her jaw flexing once, twice, controlled, her breath steady. The briefing room, bathed in fluorescent neutrality, held all the theatrics of ceremony and indoctrination, but for Rachel, every image, every gesture, every word was a piece of intelligence, each to be catalogued and stored for the moments that truly mattered. The beach was a study in precision and controlled chaos. Waves lapped methodically against sand packed firm by early morning tide, the rhythmic hiss masking the sharp metallic click of equipment being secured. Rachel Harper's eyes scanned the training zone from a discreet dune perch, binoculars passed lightly to her face, the leather strap taut across her shoulder. Every recruit moved with the mechanical efficiency drilled into them over weeks of preparation, yet her attention was singular, precise, locked on Philip as he approached the waterline. His olive-green uniform clung damply to his frame, buoyancy vest secured, helmet strapped, regulator clipped at the slight hitch in his shoulder, the fleeting twitch at his right eye, the rapid inhale followed by a paused exhale, spoke volumes to someone attuned to microsignals. From the shadows of the observation tower, Captain Daniel Rourke's eyes glinted with cold intent. He crouched slightly, adjusting the regulator he had subtly tampered with moments before, a flick of the wrist hidden beneath the canvas of his jacket. The mechanism had been altered just enough to introduce a brief but potentially catastrophic delay in airflow enough to challenge skill without overtly jeopardizing safety. His smirk was faint, a twitch in the corner of his mouth that suggested anticipation, the kind only earned through years of manipulating both equipment and ego. Rachel's grip on her binoculars tightened, knuckles blanching briefly as her sharp gaze registered the anomaly. The regulator's hose had a minuscule kink, a subtle shift that would cause erratic pressure under exertion. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she exhaled almost silently through her nose. Fingers tapped lightly against the leather strap, a micro-gesture of calculation, while her mind parsed options. Years of covert operations, infiltration missions in environments where milliseconds determined survival had trained her to recognize these subtle threats. This was one. She raised a small, compact radio from her vest, transmitting a sequence of tones barely audible over the surf, a coded warning in military shorthand. Alpha Bravo Tango. Delta, each pulse delivered with perfect cadence, carrying instructions only Philip would understand. He froze mid-step for a heartbeat, hand brushing the hose, micro-adjusting the regulator to compensate. The slight twitch in his eyelid, the same nerve-controlled tick she had taught him to recognize, was now an indicator of understanding, a silent acknowledgement. The drill commenced in earnest. Philip moved through the course with the fluidity of someone executing a meticulously rehearsed operation. Rachel tracked every motion through her binoculars, the rotation of his shoulders, the angle of his head beneath the hoe, the way his gloved hands found grips instinctively. The regulator's pressure stabilized, subtle hisses confirming proper airflow. A half-step too slow or a miscalculated twist and the test would fail. A fraction too aggressive and alarm bells might trigger. He passed flawlessly. Rourke's smirk faltered, his right hand tapping the railing with a sharp, irregular cadence, a micro-expression of suspicion crossing his face. Pupils constricted as he scanned the line of recruits, searching for some external intervention, some hidden hand that had corrected the sabotage. His lips pressed thin, jaw tightening imperceptibly, fingers flexing around the edge of the platform. He could not see Rachel from this angle, but instinct told him something had occurred beyond his immediate awareness. Rachel exhaled softly, lowering her binoculars just enough to observe the final leg of the course. Philip emerged from the water, regulator functioning perfectly, wet uniform clinging with no sign of hesitation, eyes forward, breathing steady. Rachel's lips curved subtly, a nearly invisible sign of satisfaction, though her face remained stoically neutral. She allowed her gaze to shift briefly to Rourke, noting the subtle signs, tightened shoulders, a faint furrow of the brow, the twitch of fingers adjusting his watch. Suspicion had been planted. He did not know who had intervened. Miguel Alvarez, watching from the sidelines, caught the exchange, the imperceptible shifts in both Rachel and Rourke's expressions. He adjusted his hat, making a mental note of the silent authority radiating from her. Rachel had not spoken, she had not stepped forward. Yet in those silent, calculated moments, she had protected Philip, executed an operational adjustment under the radar, and conveyed to him the discipline and awareness necessary to survive the scenario. As the recruits regrouped, Rachel allowed her breath to steady, shoulders releasing fractionally, though her eyes never left Philip. The tactical awareness, the covert intervention, the silent orchestration of his success had not been witnessed by anyone beyond herself, and that anonymity was exactly as it should be. The command tent smelled of electronics and ozone, the faint hum of generators underscoring the chatter of instructors and families. Rachel Harper stood slightly to the side, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the holographic projection flickering across the table. The simulation displayed multiple threat vectors, advancing hostiles from 3 axes, improvised hazards in the operational zone, and time-sensitive objectives layered atop one another. Even seasoned eyes could struggle to parse the data in real time. Captain Daniel Rourke hovered near the console, lips compressed, nostrils flaring imperceptibly as he surveyed the roster of recruits. His fingers drummed against the metal edge of the display console, each tap uneven, betraying his subtle irritation. He had already designated roles, carefully marginalizing Philip, relegating him to observation under the guise of safety. "Keep him out of the primary strike team," he muttered to an instructor, a faint smirk playing across the corner of his mouth. "We can't have inexperience compromising the mission." Rachel's hand traced along the edge of the clipboard, fingertips brushing the graph lines of unit movements, indicators of potential breaches. Micro-ticks betrayed her attention, a twitch of the right eyelid, a barely perceptible flex of the jaw, nostrils flaring slightly as she inhaled through her nose. Every vector, every pattern, every recurring anomaly in the simulation triggered instinctive recognition. She had seen these attack sequences before urban penetration, counterinsurgency ambushes, overlapping team infiltration all under Black Ops conditions. Her pencil scratched lightly against paper, rapid, precise lines forming a network of tactical overlays. She indicated choke points, fallback zones, and optimal flank positions, labeling each node with shorthand only insiders would understand. Her lips pressed together, a thin line of concentration, as the slight furrow of her brow suggested nothing to the untrained eye. The subtle tilt of her head toward Miguel Alvarez was the only acknowledgement of her tactical insight, a nonverbal relay of operational intelligence. Miguel's eyes followed the annotations, fingers tapping the table in time with the projected countdown. He paused, considering Rourke's imposed limitations on Philip. A faint lift of his brow, a twitch in his jaw, and he made a split-second decision. "Reassign point 3, he murmured, voice low, directing the team toward the nodes Rachel had identified. He mirrored her notes in real time, adjusting the algorithmic execution of the simulation. Philip's posture shifted subtly, shoulder blades relaxing, the micro-twitch at his left eye diminishing as he was brought into a more active role. The team responded almost instantly to the recalibration, executing maneuvers with a fluidity that bordered on prescience. Rourke's lips thinned, jaw flexing as he realized his attempt to sideline Philip had been circumvented. His eyes flicked toward Rachel, pupils constricting slightly, an almost subliminal flare of irritation passing over his features. He observed her neutral expression, the faint tightening at the corner of her mouth, the subtle set of her shoulders, silent signals of professional command he could not yet identify. The team completed the simulation flawlessly, breaches averted, objectives secured within the allotted time frame. Miguel allowed himself a fraction of a smirk, lips barely curling, eyes briefly meeting Rachel's in acknowledgement of her intervention. Rourke's cold glare lingered, sharper now, tempered by the unspoken realization that the success had not come from his orchestration, but from the discreet, precise guidance of a civilian he had underestimated. Rachel's attention shifted as a small envelope appeared at the edge of her station, unattended until she noticed it. Her gloved fingers closed around it lightly, lifting it for inspection. The letters HERO were stamped in bold, precise ink on the envelope's surface. Her nostrils flared ever so slightly, jaw flexing with a micro-expression that revealed nothing yet stirred a cascade of buried memories. Cotton name assignments, Black Ops directives, classified extractions. The emblem was a ghost from a past she had buried deep beneath layers of civilian anonymity. She exhaled slowly, letting the memory pass just long enough to refocus on the team, pencil hovering above the clipboard, eyes flicking to the next threat no, in the simulation. The room buzzed with post-exercise commentary, families murmuring in confusion at the speed and accuracy of the simulation's resolution. Rachel's lips pressed in a neutral line, hands resting lightly on the table, while Miguel discreetly catalogued the tactical decisions that had saved the exercise. Rourke's gaze remained fixed, unreadable, while the subtle micro-expressions tightened jaw, narrowing eyes. Slight flare of the nostrils betray the internal calculus of a man beginning to suspect that he had underestimated a professional whose depth extended far beyond the surface of civility. The room was dim, lit only by the muted glow of tactical monitors and the occasional flare of sunlight spilling through high windows. Rachel Harper's fingers traced the edge of the tabletop, fingertips brushing lightly against warm laminate, a subtle micro-gesture betraying nothing yet grounding her in the present. The hum of electronics filled the background, punctuated by distant drills and the muted chatter of instructors. She held her phone lightly in her palm, the device warm against her skin, the other hand resting near her side, thumb brushing a seam of her blouse. The call came with no preamble. A voice, distorted and low, carried a cadence Rachel recognized from years of covert operations, controlled, precise, deliberate. "HERO 1, it said, enunciating her code name like a blade sliding through steel. Your presence is noted. Captain Rourke is not what he seems, exercise caution." The line clicked dead before she could respond. Her nostrils flared minutely, jaw flexing once, twice, as she exhaled softly through her nose. Her thumb tapped lightly against the table in rhythmic pulses, a hidden signal of processing, assessment, and strategic calculation. Rachel's eyes shifted to her arm, tracing the familiar geometric lotus tattoo that spiraled across the back of her right bicep. The ink shimmered faintly under the fluorescent lighting, a tapestry of thin lines and sharp angles, each symbol a record of missions, extractions, and operations executed under conditions that few could imagine. Her lips pressed into a thin line, the corners pulling downward almost imperceptibly, nostrils flaring in a micro-expression of both recollection and resolve. She flexed her forearm subtly, watching the interplay of light across the tattoo's ridges, letting the memory of survival strategies, silent victories, and operational precision settle within her. Miguel Alvarez, moving with his usual quiet observation, leaned closer, fingers brushing the edge of the monitor to scroll through personnel reports. His brow lifted fractionally as he noticed patterns previously hidden in plain sight. Inconsistent annotations on exercise logs, references to classified units erased from public rosters, training sequences that hinted at advanced tactical doctrines. His lips pressed together briefly, eyes narrowing as the realization solidified. Kira, he murmured under his breath, the name a whisper of a ghosted operational history. His gaze shifted toward Rachel, a subtle nod of acknowledgement, fingers curling lightly around the clipboard in anticipation of further discoveries. Rachel's eyes met Miguel's for a fraction of a second, the exchange almost imperceptible. Recognition, trust, unspoken alignment. She exhaled slowly, nostrils flaring as she processed the implications. Task Force Hira had operated in shadows, its existence known only in classified briefings and whispered legends among elite units. Her experience there had been compartmentalized, hidden from civilian oversight, and now the past was threading itself into the present with insidious subtlety. The hum of the room shifted, a subtle change in the electrical rhythm as monitors updated, reflecting the ongoing war game simulations and personnel movements. Rachel's hand rose slowly, tapping lightly at her temple, fingertips brushing the subtle indentation where tension and thought converge. Each micro-expression a fleeting twitch of the left eyelid, a subtle tightening of her jaw, a momentary flare of the nostrils marked the calibration of her mind against potential threats. The cryptic warning had altered the vector of observation. What was once routine was now laced with the possibility of concealed hostility. Miguel's fingers flexed around the clipboard, subtle micro-adjustments reflecting his understanding of the operational anomaly. He had observed Rachel over weeks, noting her strategic interventions, the precise timing of her cues to Philip, the silent orchestration of success that left work visibly unsettled. Now, the implications of Task Force HERA's shadowy legacy added layers of gravity. Rachel flexed her tattooed arm once more, tracing the lotus's geometric complexity, letting each line, each symbol, remind her of past missions where a single miscalculation could be fatal. The memory brought a flicker of restraint across her features, a micro-expression of remembrance and calculation before she recentered her focus on the immediate operational environment. The call, the cryptic hints, the whispered history of Hira, all threads weaving together into a narrative that demanded vigilance, precision, and absolute control. Her breath settled into a controlled rhythm, shoulders realigned, fingers lightly brushing the edge of her clipboard as she prepared for the next phase. Outside, recruits moved, monitors flickered, and Captain Rourke remained oblivious to the depth of awareness converging in the quiet professionalism of Rachel Harper and the observant acumen of Miguel Alvarez. The mystery was deepening, and the stage was set for forces long hidden to reveal themselves in ways measured, precise, and irreversible. The afternoon sun glinted off the polished metal of rifles and helmets, casting sharp shadows across the parade ground as high-ranking officials and families lined the observation perimeter. The faint tang of gunpowder hung in the air, mingling with the scent of sand and ozone. Rachel Harper's eyes swept over the assembled crowd, noting the orientation of each observer, the angle of light against reflective surfaces, and the subtle micro-movements of recruits adjusting their stances. Each detail was data, each gesture a potential variable in the controlled chaos of live-fire demonstration. Philip moved in formation, his movements precise, shoulders squared, eyes forward, lips pressed in a tight, disciplined line. Rachel's gaze flicked briefly to the rookie assigned to the team, a young man with novice handling, hands betraying micro-flickers of uncertainty, a rapid inhale that preceded every trigger squeeze. Daniel Rourke patrolled the field like a predator, lips compressed, nostrils flaring slightly, chin tilted upward in a display of oversight. His eyes scanned for error, judgment etched in the almost imperceptible flare of his jaw, the twitch in his left eyelid. The rookie raised his rifle, live round-chambered, sweeping the line in unsteady arcs. A bead of sweat traced the curve of his temple, his grip shifting minutely as his thumb brushed the selector switch. Rachel's microtics tightening of her jaw, nostrils flaring, a subtle exhalation through her nose were imperceptible, controlled. Her eyes narrowed, pupils contracting as the pattern of movement triggered a cascade of instinctual recognition. Every muscle in her body readied for immediate intervention, recalling countless scenarios from classified operations where hesitation meant catastrophe. Her hand lifted almost imperceptibly, the motion slow enough to remain unnoticed, yet calibrated to the exact vector required. Fingers flexed, wrists rotated, and in a single fluid motion she intercepted the rifle mid-discharge, redirecting the barrel safely to the ground. The report of the chambering round echoed faintly, but the catastrophic trajectory was nullified. Rachel's breath remained measured, shoulders square, lips pressed lightly together, as she released the weapon into secure control, pivoting her body to shield Philip and surrounding recruits. A collective inhale swept through the observation line, unspoken recognition of the narrowly avoided disaster. Eyes widened, micro-tremors evident in hands gripping binoculars, subtle shifts in posture across the assembled families and officials. Rachel allowed herself no outward display of relief, no micro-expression of triumph. Her jaw flexed once, nostrils flared in a controlled exhalation, pupils scanning for additional anomalies in the field. Daniel Rourke's eyes landed on her, narrowing slightly, pupils constricting as the layers of protocol violation, envy, and fear collided in a silent calculus. His lips pressed thin, jaw flexing, a tick at the corner of his eye betraying his simmering frustration. He stepped forward, voice sharp, calibrated, reprimanding her for breaking protocol, masking the recognition of skill that had saved lives in real time. "This is a demonstration, Lieutenant Harper. Procedure exists for a reason," he said, each word clipped, measured, carrying authority and masked insecurity. Rachel's expression remained neutral, lips pressed in a straight line, eyes meeting his only briefly before returning to survey the field. Her micro-expressions, a subtle lift of her brow, a controlled flare of the nostrils, the slightest twitch of her jaw conveyed nothing to the untrained observer, but communicated precise awareness to those attuned, competence, control, and readiness. Miguel Alvarez, standing slightly behind the perimeter, allowed himself a subtle nod of recognition, lips curling fractionally, eyes narrowing at the orchestration he had witnessed. His hands flexed around the clipboard, noting the incident for after-action review, mental cataloging every micro-movement, every split-second decision. Philip exhaled softly, shoulders relaxing imperceptibly, eyes flicking toward his mother with a fraction of gratitude hidden in disciplined composure. Rachel's glance met his for a heartbeat, thumb brushing lightly along the strap of his uniform, a silent signal of reassurance, before returning to full observational focus. The demonstration concluded, officials nodding, families murmuring, yet Daniel Rourke's glare lingered, a frozen calculus of authority challenge, ego unsettled, and latent fear masked beneath a veneer of discipline. Rachel stepped back into the quiet rhythm of the formation, unassuming yet undeniably in control, every micro-expression, every controlled breath, every subtle movement a testament to the professional she had always been, even when hidden from the world. The morning air carried the crisp pang of salt and ozone, the flagpoles lining the parade ground stiff with tension as the wind tugged methodically at the banners. Rachel Harper stood at the periphery of the formation, her hands clasped lightly at her waist, eyes scanning over the orderly ranks of recruits and their families. Olive-green uniforms shimmered under the late morning sun, each crease precise, boots polished, posture rigid. Her posture mirrored theirs in outward form, yet her micro-expressions faint flex of the jaw, a subtle lift of her brow, a measured exhale through the nostrils betrayed the inward calculation that had never left her in decades of operational command. Philip wove through the ranks with a mixture of eagerness and apprehension, eyes darting for familiar markers, his posture slightly more rigid than trained, lips pressed in a disciplined line. Each step was a subtle negotiation between performance and nerves, every microtick at the corner of his mouth betraying awareness of the silent oversight of the brass. His gaze swept past the high-ranking officers and finally landed on Rachel, a flicker of recognition sparking in his eyes, quickly suppressed as he adjusted his shoulders, forcing composure. Rumors had begun circulating among the senior officers. Low-toned whispers passed in the shadowed alcoves of command tents and behind polished railings. A confidential report flagged Daniel Rourke's negligence during prior exercises, citing procedural lapses that could have endangered recruits. The subtle furrow of brows and the tap of a polished shoe across the tarmac betrayed micro-calculations, strategic considerations being weighed quietly, eyes scanning the parade ground, pupils contracting and expanding in measured observation. Rachel noticed the glances, the way eyes lingered longer than protocol dictated, how subtle gestures, the tilt of a head, the faint flare of a nostril, the slight tightening of a jaw hinted at both suspicion and anticipation. She allowed a slow, controlled exhale, shoulders settling into neutral alignment, fingers flexing lightly around the hem of her dress, every motion deliberate, yet unremarkable. Her mind catalogued each officer, noting posture, stance, and gaze vectors, predicting the micro-adjustments they would make once she moved or if she remained still. A senior officer approached, his boots clicking against the polished concrete, with a quiet authority. He carried a small, discreet envelope, the weight of classified observation evident in his precise, measured steps. Without a word, he handed it to Rachel. Her thumb brushed the flap, sensing the unspoken instructions within. Watch, observe, report. A pulse of recognition passed through her jawline, a subtle flex of her lips. She understood the subtext. The brass wanted the truth, yet no one could articulate the depth of her operational history without compromise. Daniel Rourke positioned himself near the center of the field, hands clasped behind his back, fingers tapping once, twice, a minor microtick that betrayed a tightening of control as he surveyed both recruits and spectators. His pupils constricted slightly as they swept over Rachel, a fraction of hesitation betraying the flicker of recognition that had surfaced months prior, during exercises where her interventions had gone unnoticed by all but Miguel Alvarez. He straightened, chin lifting, jaw flexing, lip curling faintly, a practiced display of authority concealing underlying calculation. Rachel's gaze followed Philip as he adjusted his stance, subtle shifts in weight, micro-ticks of awareness as he scanned the field for unseen cues. She allowed a fraction of a nod, barely perceptible, signaling a silent connection that would guide him through the ceremony's rigors. Her thumb brushed lightly over the intricate lines of her lotus tattoo beneath the sleeve of her dress, the geometric precision, a tactile reminder of every covert operation, every silent victory, and every measured risk she had ever undertaken. The wind lifted the flags, a gentle rustle synchronizing with the quiet rhythm of controlled breathing across the ranks. Rachel's eyes flicked briefly to each officer, each recruit, cataloging posture, gaze, and micro-expression. Every subtle twitch tightened shoulders, rapid inhale, micro-shifts in stance was data. Her lips pressed into a thin line, exhale slow and measured, and her hands flexed lightly in an almost imperceptible pattern, maintaining control, preparing for any action required. The secret message, the whispers of investigation, the eyes tracking her all converged into a single operational awareness. Rachel Harper stood at the edge of ceremony, sideline in appearance, but central in consequence. The ceremony ground stretched in precise geometric lines, flags snapping crisply in the mid-afternoon breeze, the sun casting sharp highlights across the polished brass of officers' insignia. Philip stood rigid, shoulders square, eyes forward, as Daniel Rourke's voice cut across the formation with surgical precision, stripping away dignity in a public display. An acceptable performance, he barked, lips tight, jaw flexing, pupils constricting as his gaze swept over the young recruit. Each word landed with a deliberate cadence, designed to humiliate in front of families and fellow officers alike. Philip's hands clenched at his sides, knuckles whitening in disciplined restraint. A flicker at the corner of his eye betrayed a micro-expression of restrained fury, rapid inhale through the nostrils, jaw flexing in controlled tension. Rachel watched from the perimeter, lips pressed in a thin line, shoulders squared, posture still yet imbued with the calm authority of someone accustomed to assessing threats in real time. Her eyes scanned every officer, every recruit, noting micro-ticks, subtle shifts in stance, the almost imperceptible exhale or flex of muscles under pressure. The wind shifted, tugging gently at her sleeve, drawing back the edge of her dress to reveal the intricate lotus tattoo etched across the back of her right arm. The lines and geometric precision of the ink caught the sunlight, a silent emblem of survival, strategy, and victories unacknowledged by the public. Her hand rose slowly, unconsciously flexing the forearm as she stepped forward, each movement precise, controlled, deliberate, a choreography honed by decades of clandestine operations. Daniel's eyes flicked involuntarily to the tattoo, and a micro-expression betrayed him, pupils contracting sharply, jaw locking for a fraction of a second, the nostrils flaring ever so slightly. The arrogance he carried like armor faltered, a subtle stutter in the cadence of his command as recognition surged through him. The insignia, geometric, unmistakable, belong only to those who had earned a place in Task Force Hera, the elite unit whose operations were whispered about in classified circles. His chest tightened, a breath caught in his throat, lips parting briefly in stunned comprehension, yet he masked it behind a veneer of disciplined posture. The crowd remained oblivious at first, families shifting in their seats, the murmur of anticipation floating along the perimeter, but the ripple of realization moved quickly through the senior officers. Micro-expressions, a tightened jaw, narrowed eyes, a subtle tilt of the head spread among the brass, signaling recognition and recalibration. A respected admiral stepped forward, voice slow but carrying across the formation, "Lieutenant Harper, Task Force Hera." The words hit with the weight of authority, reverberating across the assembly like a seismic pulse. Daniel's control fractured further. His fists flexed at his sides, shoulders squared as if bracing for impact, but his eyes betrayed the calculation of a man suddenly aware that every assumption he had held about Rachel's civilian status, her supposed limitations, and his own authority was now obsolete. A slight tick at the corner of his left eye, almost imperceptible, marked the conflict between ego and operational reality. Rachel's lips pressed into a neutral line, exhaling softly through her nostrils, eyes scanning the formation, the crowd, and Philip with the precision of a trained observer. She let the micro-expression of recognition pass briefly across her jaw and brow, the faintest curl of a lip hinting at satisfaction without compromising discipline. Her forearm flexed once, tattoo catching a glint of sunlight, and every officer, recruit, and family member who understood the subtle cues adjusted instantaneously. The power dynamic shifted silently, inexorably, as whispers of Task Force Hera's reputation passed from eye to eye. Philip's posture relaxed fractionally, shoulders lifting, jaw unclenching, eyes reflecting a mix of eye and restrained pride. Rachel allowed a brief micro-nod, imperceptible to most, signaling alignment and reassurance. Daniel, finally absorbing the full implications, attempted to regain composure, but the flicker of recognition in his pupils and the subtle flare of his nostrils betrayed that control was now irrevocably shifted. The Admiral's acknowledgement sealed the revelation, and the assembled crowd, though unaware of the full operational history, absorbed the gravity in measured silence. Rachel stood at the center of the transformed field, her lotus tattoo exposed, her posture unyielding yet calm, embodying the quiet authority of a professional whose history commanded respect without declaration. Every micro-expression, every controlled movement, every subtle breath marked the completion of a revelation long in the making. Daniel's gaze lingered, pupils constricted, jaw locked, hands flexing at his sides, a man confronted with the undeniable fact that the quiet professional before him was no ordinary observer, but a force shaped by elite warfare, survival, and mastery. The midday sun glinted sharply off the parade ground, casting elongated shadows that crisscrossed between polished boots and the crisp folds of olive-green uniforms. Rachel Harper stepped forward, her posture unassuming yet radiating controlled authority, every micro-movement deliberate, every breath measured. Her lips pressed in a thin line as she lifted her hand slightly, fingers flexing with precision, and began to recite codes, operational dates, and mission designations with a cadence that carried across the formation. Each designation, HERA 7, Delta 14, Operation Meridian, slipped from her lips with the quiet finality of one accustomed to both giving and following orders in life-or-death conditions. Families and recruits at first watched with polite curiosity, eyes scanning the patterns of her speech, unaware of the depth behind the seemingly arbitrary letters and numbers. Officers exchanged micro-glances, the slight lift of an eyebrow, the fraction of a jaw twitch, a subtle constriction of the pupils as comprehension unfolded. Those with operational experience recognized the precision of timeline alignment, the consistency of unit deployment, the accuracy of after-action references that only insiders could verify. Each detail Rachel spoke validated a narrative long suppressed, exposing the discrepancies in Daniel Rourke's public account of prior operations. Daniel's lips pressed tight, jaw flexing with controlled tension, nostrils flaring just enough to betray the internal computation of exposure. His eyes tracked Rachel in micro-flickers, pupils contracting with every phrase she delivered, the cadence of her speech methodically dismantling the facade of his authority. The meticulous recitation left no room for improvisation. Each name, each operation date, was a scalpel, cutting through lies with surgical precision. He raised a hand, slightly trembling at the knuckles, fingers curling into a subtle fist, yet his composure remained outwardly firm, posture rigid, shoulders squared and almost imperceptible veneer over rapidly shifting internal calculations. Rachel's micro-expressions betrayed nothing of triumph, only calm, controlled awareness. A faint twitch at the corner of her left eye, nostrils flaring minutely, and the ever so slight lift of a brow hinted at satisfaction without abandoning discipline. Her gaze swept the audience, recruits standing tall, families tightening their grip on seats, officers with subtle nods of recognition, all absorbing the revelation in real time. The lotus tattoo on her arm caught sunlight intermittently as her sleeve shifted with her subtle movements, a silent emblem of past precision, survival, and authority. Philip stood at attention, chest lifted, hands loosely clasped at his sides. His eyes followed his mother with a blend of eye and emerging pride, micro-expressions revealing the internal reconciliation of childhood perception and adult realization. The woman who had guided him quietly, whose sacrifices had been invisible to most, was not just his mother but a veteran of elite, clandestine operations. The corners of his lips lifted fractionally, shoulders relaxing minutely, as the narrative unfolding before him aligned with truths he had not yet fully comprehended. The assembled crowd's reaction built gradually, a ripple that became a wave. Hands clapped with increasing frequency, boots stamping lightly in acknowledgement, murmurs of recognition threading through families and officers alike. Some of the brass straightened imperceptibly, lips curling in slight smiles, pupils narrowing in controlled approval, while others adjusted posture, fingers brushing the seams of their uniforms as they recalculated the implications of the revealed operational history. The applause swelled, no longer directed at Daniel Rourke, whose jaw now flexed with restrained frustration, lips pressed tight, fists flexing subtly at his sides. Rachel allowed a measured exhale through her nostrils, lips maintaining a neutral line, shoulders squared. Her eyes lingered briefly on Philip, allowing him the recognition he deserved, a nod so slight that only he could perceive it, and then returned to the crowd. Each micro-expression, each controlled breath, reinforced the undeniable truth. The underestimated mother before them had, through quiet professionalism and elite experience, dismantled a cover-up, restored honor where it had been denied, and commanded respect without fanfare. The applause became a chorus of acknowledgement, a tangible shift in perception, cementing Rachel Harper's position not just as a mother, but as a warrior whose history demanded recognition. The mid-morning sun reflected off the wet asphalt of the parade ground, casting elongated shadows that intersected with the crisp lines of olive-green uniforms and polished brass insignia. Daniel Rourke stood near the command pavilion, his posture rigid, shoulders squared, lips pressed into a thin, controlled line. His eyes flicked toward Rachel Harper only once before an orderly officer approached, a crisp folder in hand, and delivered the news. Pending investigation, he was immediately relieved of command. His pupils constricted sharply, jaw locking for a fraction of a second as comprehension and frustration collided beneath the mask of discipline. The faint twitch at the corner of his eye betrayed the storm of internal calculation, micro-expressions betraying ego, resentment, and an unacknowledged recognition of defeat. Rachel's gaze remained unwavering, calm, and measured. Her lips pressed in a neutral line, shoulders square, hands flexing lightly at her sides in an almost imperceptible display of readiness. She observed the transfer of authority with the precision of someone trained to catalog every micro-movement, every adjustment in posture, every subtle shift in gaze that carried operational implications. Her eyes flicked to each senior officer in turn, noting slight head tilts, a barely perceptible flex of the jaw, a measured tightening of the hands around ceremonial folders. Recognition, approval, and respect passed silently through these micro-expressions, a language unspoken but universally understood among those who operated in high-stakes environments. The senior officers moved forward, salutes crisp and precise, their eyes meeting Rachel's with quiet reverence. Each gesture carried weight beyond the formalities. It was acknowledgement of her professionalism, her operational mastery, and the integrity that had quietly governed every action she had taken on the base. Rachel returned each salute with the same calculated precision, a subtle lift of her chin, a micro nod, the faintest flare of her nostrils conveying calm command without ostentation. Philip stood at her side, the transformation in his demeanor apparent. The boy who had entered the base under the shadow of public censure now moved with measured confidence, shoulders squared, hands loosely clasped, eyes scanning the assembled officers and families with recognition and pride. Every subtle exhale, every flex of his jaw, every blink betrayed the internal reconciliation of admiration and astonishment. Rachel allowed her eyes to meet his briefly, thumb brushing lightly against the strap of his uniform, as if to anchor him, a microsignal of reassurance and shared victory. A senior officer approached with a formal offer, a consultative role overseeing the integrity of base operations. Rachel's expression remained neutral, lips pressed in a thin, straight line, eyes flicking across the formation as she considered the implications. She flexed her fingers slightly, a subtle tick at the corner of her eye, before giving a measured nod, acknowledging both responsibility and the trust implicit in the role. Her posture relaxed fractionally, yet her presence remained commanding, every movement deliberate, every micro-expression controlled, signaling competence without seeking admiration. The ceremony concluded as Rachel walked slowly across the parade ground, the muted rustle of her dress sensing with the faint snapping of flags overhead. Philip at her side, now officially a SEAL, walked with a newfound alignment, his head lifted, gaze forward, absorbing the weight of the day's events. The lotus tattoo on Rachel's arm remained hidden beneath her sleeve, yet its presence was felt in the subtle confidence radiating from her posture, the precise cadence of her steps, and the quiet authority that lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed her vindication. Families and officers alike watched the pair move away, subtle nods, micro-adjustments of posture, and quiet murmurs of respect marking the ripple effect of justice served. Rachel exhaled slowly, shoulders relaxing fractionally, lips softening in a controlled release of tension, eyes scanning the horizon for potential threats, but for the first time allowing herself a fleeting awareness of accomplishment. Her presence had not only restored honor to her son, it had recalibrated the perception of authority across the base, a silent assertion of expertise and integrity that would reverberate long after the day ended. As the camera drones lifted to capture the departing figure of Rachel and Philip, the crowd's applause continued, subdued yet resonant, a testament to the power of understated heroism. The quiet professional had commanded respect without declaration, had rewritten the calculus of authority with precision, and had ensured that the integrity of the base and the lives under its protection would remain secure. For those witnessing, the lesson was unmistakable: true mastery is never loud. It is deliberate, measured, and unassailable. If you want to see more stories of quiet professionals and underrated heroes in action, make sure to subscribe to the channel.